So we're going to go right into our next session here. So the title of the session is National to Local and the Mobile Strategies that are happening around that. And we have two great speakers we're going to get into in just a second. Actually, Denise, why don't you come on up here? So to kick things off first, though, a little bit of BI/Kelsey data as kind of a preface to some of the things we're going to be talking about. So these are the forecast data that we have for mobile U.S. revenues. And these are data that I come up with, and they're fresh data that came out a few weeks ago. And we spend a lot of time putting together inputs from the marketplace. So what you see here is U.S. mobile ad revenues going from $3.65 billion last year up to almost $21 billion in 2017. But this particular slide breaks out the segment of that overall revenue opportunity that is location-targeted revenue, or revenue from ads that are location-targeted, versus those that aren't, and those that are more broadly based national branding campaigns. So there are lots of different flavors of how we measure what location-targeted ads are. We're going to go over some of them today. But this really kind of underscores the opportunity. Right now, it's about 37% of the overall mobile ads are attributed to campaigns that are location-targeted in some ways. And that's owing a lot to the location-targeted capabilities of the device, the local intent of users that we've cited a few times throughout this conference, and then also the ad premiums we're starting to see for ads that are performing well because of their local relevance. So we're going to get into some of the ways that that's actually happening, but this is just really to kind of underscore some of the, the quantification of the revenue opportunity we're going to be talking about throughout the day. So why don't we go now right into our interview with Denise. So to start, Denise, tell us a little bit about yourself and the Weather Company, and then we'll go into some of the details of what you're doing.
Sure. So the Weather Company, you most likely know us as the Weather Channel. We've been around for 3 decades as the Weather Channel, and certainly our mobile properties, weather.com, and our mobile apps, we like to think are best-of-breed products in the market. On the local side, my responsibility is to work. We have five different sales channels, and my sales channels are mid-market and local. And believe it or not, while we've been around for 30 years, this is the first year we actually have a local sales channel where we're actually working in local markets with local merchants, local businesses, to help them gain exposure across our properties.
So I want to get into that local channel issue in just a bit. First, we're going to go over some of the attributes of your product strategy. Okay. But even before then, you mentioned that the company has changed its name, the rebranding. What was behind that? Is that to kind of diversify as not just a channel, but just multi-channel?
Absolutely. That, and combined with, we purchased several data companies in the space. So Weather Services International, I'm sure many of you are familiar with them in the local markets. They power a lot of data for local broadcasters, print companies to be able to produce local weather products of their own. And so we've purchased companies like that, which have given us a full umbrella effect, and I do use that term intentionally. We do use that a lot. And we also power things like the airlines use apps of ours that we create on a B2B side, so that as you fly home and there's a new winter storm heading out east, your pilot can better prepare for what to do before, during, and after flight.
Interesting. So let's get into kind of your range of products currently, especially mobile. You have a mobile app, you have an iPad app. Tell us a little bit about that range, and then any usage metrics that you guys have made public or that can kind of quantify, give the audience an idea of the scale you're operating on.
Sure. Certainly it's a really large scale, and the way I like to look at it is it's actually 40,000 mini sites, if you will, whether that's online or on a mobile device, because we provide weather in 40,000 different zip codes. So we're inherently local. We just, again, hadn't looked at the business. We always looked at it top down because we had the biggest advertisers in the country working with us, so we naturally transitioned to digital with those advertisers versus really looking at the DNA of what we are. And so in terms of usage, digital properties, we deliver over 100 million uniques a month across those properties. But it's interesting when you start thinking about how consumers use us, and I'm hopeful many of you use us on many devices as well. With your laptop or your desktop, most folks use this as a planning tool. So I'm planning my day, it's late at night, I'm trying to decide, will I walk my kids to school or will I need to drive them? Really using us as a planning tool. And then our mobile devices have a higher frequency because you're using it on the go, certainly, throughout your day.
Now, one thing that when we were kind of preparing for this struck me is that, weather is one of the categories of content that is consumed the most on mobile, and it kind of makes sense because in mobile, especially with an app strategy, you have a challenge of, I like to call it easy come, easy go, because there are low barriers to creation for apps. So you have, over 1 million apps in the App Store was just announced. And for the same reason, it's a lower barrier to adoption. So users will kind of download a lot, but then there's a heavy drop-off rate. So you guys are dealing with a category of content that inherently is advantaged because weather is always changing. There's a certain lock-in or stickiness effect to it. So how have you kind of leveraged that position, inherently as an advantage, the content itself, with kind of building your product strategy?
I think we've gotten really good at being able to bring in more real-time data. So if you have our app downloaded, you'll see that we'll have like a little side call-out action of if there's a storm coming, if there's going to be rain. We expect it to start at 2 and end at 4. So we're trying to be much better at satisfying that need for consumers who essentially, again, on the go, you want to know exactly when will it rain, when will it stop, when will it snow. I'm from Chicago, so we want to know when will it snow, what will the temperature be at the Bears game, and things like that.
Well, that's one of the things that we're espousing a lot in product development and mobile. For the same reason I mentioned, there's a lot of downloads, but then active usage is a challenge. So how do you engage people without having them even open the app? So you have things like push alerts or kind of local personalization and discovery features.
Absolutely. I think we're still surprised at the number of people who still in the morning want to get an email with their weather in it. So we absolutely do email alerts, we do text alerts, absolutely. Any way that a consumer wants to consume their weather from us, we want to be there and be able to push, pull, consume on their own time.
Right, there you go. Push and pull, that's the best way to look at it. Now, I mentioned you have an advantage in the nature of the content. One thing I think you guys are challenged by is that on iOS, at least, which absolutely has a large market share, there is a default weather app. So you must be challenged in a lot of ways in attracting users beyond that default, kind of just the lazy factor of using what's there without kind of actively going into the App Store. So is it the brand equity? What do you attribute to that usage?
Definitely brand equity. So we do have the number 7th most downloaded iPhone app and number 2 iPad.
Nice.
And so we definitely do get the pull from our brand, but we also partner with a lot of companies on the downloads, whether it's at the handset level or at, we partner with Yahoo, for example. We power their weather, Google, MSN. So we're very conscientious to make sure that when people are consuming weather, and our studies show people look at weather over 300 times a month, and when they do that, if they're not always coming to us, at least the weather data they're getting is coming from us.
Yep. So let's go back to something you said, which is weather is inherently local, and you've thought about your actual kind of operational strategy along that kind of paradigm. And it's interesting, too, because people are raising their hand and saying where they are with weather lookups and other things like that. And that is great because, a lot of different companies, whether they be ad networks or publishers, are very challenged by this kind of getting an accurate fix on a location in a privacy-friendly way. So talk a little bit about that factor and what you're doing along the lines of, and we can go to the next slide because I think you have some great data on, there we go, the type of interaction and the level of confidence you can have in someone's location based on their consumption of your app.
Yes. So here again, this is where the local story works really well when we talk to a local car dealer or a local realtor, a local furniture store, really talking through that every day people come to us in order to get what they want from us, which is their local weather. They give us a very valuable piece of information, which is where they live. And we've determined that 9 times out of 10, when you enter your zip code, that is indeed where you live. So that enables us to work with local marketers to define a primary marketing area around their retail location for them to target, and sometimes even conquest, right? Car dealers love to conquest. They want to target around their competitor's dealership, if you will. So that gives us that rich set of data, and it gets us out of the discussions of IP and lat long and can you geofence and where's the volume. And it's a very simple discussion that works really well in the local market because at the end of the day, we all know local businesses want to drive people who live close to their stores into their stores more often. And
for the audience's background, those unfamiliar with some of these challenges, we like to call it the 10% problem. It's often said that location-based impressions, only 10% of them are accurate down to a lat-long level, even many more than that. claim that, and that comes down to some of the challenge, as you mentioned, IP targeting is the easiest way to go about getting a fix on location, but in many cases the most inaccurate because it just resolves to a reverse IP lookup where a cell tower happens to be and a number of other factors I won't go into now. And then also the opt-in. Sometimes when you're dealing with apps, you're relying on you've all seen it in your apps. This app would like to use your location. When you opt in for that, that's among those 10%. In many more cases, that's not the case. So it really is a true challenge to get in all this kind of excitement around location-based content and ad targeting. It's the unsexy part that's the elephant in the room is that it's really sometimes hard to get an accurate location. So it's kind of the weak link in the chain.
And how do you explain all that to a local business, right? I really appreciated what Facebook said yesterday: simplify, simplify, simplify. So the media vests of the world, they're going to get that. They understand that. They study those trends every day. But a local business and their local agency, is, you don't have enough time and they don't have enough bandwidth to hear that story of how it works. So
absolutely. Yeah. So let's talk about how you have kind of applied some of those things that collecting lots of great data and applying that towards different kind of ad models.
So I think this is where it gets really interesting for our business. So all of us working with local marketers, we understand that there is seasonality to a lot of products. In the case, what you're looking at right now is tires. So typically in the fall, tire retailers, they boost their campaigns, their spending in order to take advantage of people preparing for the colder weather that's to come. And the old way was the calendar says fall is coming, boost those ads, and let's get moving. The way we're looking at that and approaching that problem is at a very hyper-local level, one, and two, making sure that the timing of those ads meets the right conditions for somebody ready to buy tires. So what you're looking at here is we've pulled out 5 example cities of when tire sales actually start to lift in the fall based on very specific weather conditions in those markets. And you can see it varies. In Chicago, when it rains 2 days or more than usual and there's above average wind, that incents us and it triggers us to go out and buy tires. However, in Seattle, they need 2 days of above average wind only. So we're really trying to model out using our data as well as sales data and activity data. What are those triggers, market by market, that when something changes and the right weather elements are hit, that somebody's incented to make a purchase or even an activity? And that activity could be go out more to local zoos or go out to eat more. So really trying to model, again, people's behavior at the hyperlocal level to weather patterns.
Now, does this trigger kind of programmatic ad placement or I guess I should say or ad sales teams? You mentioned you're building that in their strategy. Does it go down to the sales level quite yet?
It is right now. We're actually executing in Q4 where we're working with, we have our own sales team that's a mid-market team, and then we work with local sales channel partners. So we've rolled out 7. We have 30 more in Q1. So for example, like the Hartford Current, they represent our brand in Hartford, Connecticut. And they're starting to execute this strategy. They have one of their largest tire advertisers out there, Modern Tire. We're starting to work with them on these types of campaigns. So, yes.
That's great. So a similar example you have about soup in the spring.
Yes, and we brought this example for soup because typically if you're marketing soup, you think, well, I'm really going to spend all of my budget in the soup months of winter. But what we're trying to show is that you can have an always-on approach for any product and use data, right? It's the era of big data. Use big data to set up, schedule your ads, and let the ads trigger and launch at that right moment where people really feel that they want to buy soup, which is interesting in Boston. I don't know how many folks are from Boston. When it's more humid in the spring, you want your clam chowder. So we need to talk about that some more. But
yeah, right. No, the other interesting thing about this too is that the kind of subtext is that data or big data is showing us that there are sometimes unexpected outcomes. You can't always kind of go with what's logical.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is interesting too. So we've been talking about lots of different types of advertising strategies, and usually when we talk about geo-targeting or any kind of location-based targeting of content, it's along the lines of where the ad shows up. But I think equally important is what the ad says. So the concept of the creative changing. So that's, I think, an emerging area we're looking at a lot. Tell us what you've done along those lines here.
So what we're looking to do in the market is more and more make sure that the creative adapts to those weather conditions. So if we know in the spring, Boston, it's more humid than usual and people want to buy soup, we want to make sure that the ad addresses that insight we have. And here you can see two examples. One is Panera, the other is Dick's Sporting Goods. One is, in the case of Panera, they have, they always promote their summer salads, and in this case, they wanted to be active on days when it was warmer than usual to promote their salads and pull in that market identifier. And then on the right-hand side, a little bit opposite weather. It's a little bit colder, reminding people for Dick's Sporting Goods about that particular fleece that applies to that weather.
That's interesting, and you can start to think of the different ways this can go besides products that are specifically weather-oriented, whether they be umbrellas or tires or jackets or summer salads, but things that, not just temperature, but, what's the pollen count in the air, obvious implications for nearby pharmacies. It's interesting, and even beyond those types of examples, probably things that the data will uncover that you never thought of. So let's go back to one thing that you mentioned earlier, or actually, sorry about that, with working with local constituencies. The Weather Company is a company with national reach, national resources, but again, as we discussed, the content is inherently local. So how are you bringing together the best of both worlds, not just in sales, but one thing that we talked about last week was things like local weather personalities, things that kind of add more context and relevance.
Yes, on our local forecast pages, we actually ran a test in one market where we pulled in the best-known meteorologist in that market, and our local forecast videos were from that meteorologist, and we noticed that people wanted to watch videos at twice the rate than usual. So we typically have somebody that looks like a national person in front of a national map on those local pages. So our big insight there was that the more local content we can pull in, the more relevant we're going to be on those local pages, right? Probably very obvious to all of you, but something we needed to test. And I think that's one thing when we go into local markets, we're surprised at the little duplication of a local broadcast or a print entity with our product. So we typically look at this as a 1 + 1 = 3. If we can help that local market bring their content onto our site, get incremental distribution for their content, help them sell some ads, we think it's a win for the consumer because it's more relevant. It's a win for us because we deliver a more satisfying experience. We grow ad impressions, which is a win for the advertiser.
So for the local media companies in the audience or any of the broadcasters here, what do those relationships look like, or what do you look for to kind of as an ideal local partnership?
Yes. We like markets that are impacted by weather. So that's number one because when
that's everywhere in the last week.
Yeah. Exactly. So we like tumultuous weather markets because we get a lot of good activity and a lot of good weather triggers going. I also, to be honest, we look for good partners who are all in, who kind of drink the Kool-Aid. And in a market, we usually, particularly the large ones, will look at 2 or 3 partners. And if the senior management and that local sales manager, they're all in and they want it, that's who we want to work with, because none of this is easy, right? Rolling out a new product set or sharing content isn't easy. It takes bandwidth and time. We've seen, again, great success with it, and we think it's the right strategy for us locally. But again, we really need that local market to really want to win with us in weather.
So I live here in San Francisco, and the last week has been the coldest since I've lived here over the last decade. So the last question is it going to warm up this weekend?
Well, what's ironic about that in San Francisco is those of us from Chicago, we're not wearing coats, because when we left, and this gets to the temporal nature of weather, when I left Chicago, it was 9 degrees. We came here, we thought, this is spectacular, it's spring-like weather. Yeah. And so I think that's the
it's all relative.
That's the interesting thing about weather, it's relative. But I think you can expect pretty much more of the same in San Francisco. But again, out east, check your forecast, check your airline schedules, because there is another massive cold front coming through the East Coast.
Nice. Well, that's great. You actually know the content too, in addition to having a great product strategy. So please join me in thanking Denise, and Ben Smith, if you could come up.